So good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to our 2022 Empowerment and Policy Conference. The conference got off to an amazing start this morning with our national president, Mark H. Morial. And we have the opportunity to hear from some other incredible speakers discussing racial equity and holistic health. So if you're continuing with us from this morning, or if you're joining us for the first time right now, welcome. Our panel this hour kicks off the education track for the conference, and we're going to be focusing on how to achieve equity in education in the midst of COVID-19 recovery. Our discussion will be framed around how staff shortages, resource gaps, and the emergence of the virtual classroom during the COVID-19 pandemic have strained public education across the country. As we push toward a new normal, we ask, what can communities do to improve educational outcomes? And what is most critical for us to focus on in this moment? During this hour, we're going to find answers to all of these questions from professionals from across the education community. And we're going to also preview a new report documenting the pandemic's impact on education in Louisiana. I'm Cathy Washington, Executive Vice President of the Urban League of Louisiana, and I will be serving as your moderator for today's conversation. Many of you may be aware that this is Women's History Month, and I'm excited to be joined today by an all-female panel, which you will meet right now. Panelists, if you haven't turned on your cameras, I ask that you do so. Okay. So we may have one or two panelists who will be joining us momentarily. I see Betty, I see Dr. Alexander, and there's Tia Mills. So the whole gang is here. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to keep my introductions brief. I want to make sure that we allow enough time in this hour for the rich discussion and the discourse that will follow. So I'll start by introducing Dr. Jawan Brown Alexander. Dr. Alexander is an educational consultant and former chief of schools for New Schools for New Orleans. As an educational leader and advocate, Dr. Brown has contributed extensive work in a number of areas, including school quality, teacher and leadership development, curriculum, and working with communities of practice, looking at data, trauma, and informed practices in literacy. Dr. Alexander, we're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here today with you all.
Awesome. We next have Ms. Betty Ward Cooper. And Ms. Ward Cooper is a retired career educator and former board president for Monroe City Schools. Her continued passion for education is demonstrated through her service as a current board member for Monroe City Schools District 5. Ms. Betty Ward Cooper, welcome.
Greetings to all. Thank you for inviting me.
I want to now introduce Dr. Tia T. Mills. Greetings, Dr. Mills. Dr. Mills is president of the Louisiana Association of Educators, and I can't think of a more powerful group than the LAE that is working to advance justice and excellence in public education. Dr. Mills, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Last but certainly not least is Ms. Debra Vaughan with Vaughan Consulting, LLC. Deb is a consultant and a researcher, and her firm offers innovative solutions for complex issues, prioritizing equity, excellence, and empowerment. Good afternoon, Deb.
Hey there, it's an honor to be here.
So we'll proceed today with specific questions that we prepared for each of our panelists. And then we have a couple of questions that we'll just allow everyone to respond to. If we have enough time in the end, we'll certainly check in with the chat and hopefully get to address questions or comments that the audience may have. Deb, I want to begin with you. We've had an opportunity to work extensively with you on the Urban League's 2020 Advancing Educational Equity Report and our Baton Rouge Equity Report. And those reports were very effective in surfacing how African Americans and other subgroups were performing on a range of indicators in comparison to their white counterparts. Can you start us off today by giving us some of the highlights from what you found in your research on education equity and COVID-19? We've been hearing so much locally and nationally about learning loss and the impact of COVID-19 has had since March 2020. What should we expect to learn from the report that you are preparing to release with the Urban League?
Sure. So like you said, even before COVID, students in vulnerable communities, particularly Black and Hispanic students, English language learners, students with disabilities, and students from low-income households were experiencing inequities in access to high-quality schools, access to highly effective teachers, and access to rigorous and challenging curriculum, and inequities in access to resources and adequate funding, like we pointed out in those equity reports that the Urban League published. Evidence shows that the pandemic has negatively affected overall academic growth for students, has widened pre-existing gaps, has deepened the impact of disparities in access to technology and other barriers to engagement, facing many students of color and students living in poverty, has weakened the ability to engage English language learners and amplified language barriers and enhanced difficulties experienced by students with disabilities. The long-term effects are still unknown, but it's likely that it's going to just have an exponential impact over time. The research that I've conducted on post-pandemic achievement gaps in urban public school districts in Louisiana really highlights what we'll see in 2021 data. And I'm excited to present just a couple findings, but I've got to warn you that the results are a little disturbing and might make some a little uncomfortable. But it's important that we acknowledge the brutal facts in order to address the issues and take action to reverse the negative impact of these inequities. The first data point that I think it's a really important one that I'd like to talk about is third grade reading or English language arts. And I think this is an important data point because it's really one of the first milestones in a student's learning. I like to think about it like from up to third grade, students learn to read, and beyond third grade, they have to read to learn. So third grade reading is really important. And when we look at third grade reading in Louisiana, before the pandemic, we were making progress and all students in all subgroups were increasing in the percentage of the students scoring mastery and above, which is really what is equivalent to grade level. But gaps still existed and the gaps were increasing. After, as a result of the pandemic, and according to the data for 2021, one of three things happened in in the districts that we studied in the research. One thing, gaps decreased because all subgroups fell back in their performance. So that was one outcome. The other, gaps increased, but at a similar rate, even though the performance of all subgroups decreased. But the most alarming result was that gaps increased significantly. And because African-American students fell back, their performance decreased a lot, but the performance of white students increased. So I think that's an area that we should really be concerned about. And I'll give you an example of a data point. In one district, the percentage of the students, Black students performing at grade level in third grade reading went from 32% to 26% after the pandemic, while the percentage of white students scoring at grade level in third grade remained at 76%. So I think that's kind of, I mean, it makes us wonder and think about the inequities and access to the resources that lead to those types of results. We see the same sorts of things when we look at the data for socioeconomic status. In almost every district that we studied, scores decreased. And for both kids in higher income families, but the scores for students in low income families decreased even more. So I think that one thing that the implication is, how did this virtual engagement as a result of the pandemic or lack of engagement impact the learning of our second and third graders? And then what resources were missing or underutilized that prevented learning and engagement in some households and not others? And then how will we as districts help our now fourth graders recover that learning loss that we suffered as a result? And then another interesting data point, if I can just go on for one more minute, is I looked at kids before the pandemic as they progressed from third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade, and then also from sixth grade to seventh grade to eighth grade. Before the pandemic and then after the pandemic. And I saw that for sure after the pandemic, there was a significant loss of learning as students progressed from grade level to grade level to grade level. So for example, in elementary school, before the pandemic, when students went from third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade, the percentage of students that were at mastery or higher maintained. So there was not a loss of learning as students went from third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade in English language arts through elementary school. But during the pandemic, from third grade in 2019 to fifth grade in 2021, there was a significant drop in the percentage of students that were scoring at grade level. So our kids lost learning as they moved from third grade to fifth grade. We saw the same thing in math. And the interesting thing in middle school, as students went from sixth grade in 2019 to seventh grade in 20 to eighth grade in 2021 in English language arts in middle school, there wasn't a drop in percentage of students scoring mastery, but there wasn't the same increase in scores as there was pre-pandemic, but there was a significant loss in math. So I think there's a lot to learn about how we engage students when we engage them virtually. For our young students in elementary schools, there was definitely a loss of learning through that virtual engagement. In middle school, we were able to increase that learning during our virtual engagement in English language arts, but we significantly lost learning in math. So that's just a couple of the data, the learning or findings that are going to come out in the report that I think really help us to think about the types of things that we can learn from the data when we disaggregate it and look at it in a variety of ways. And the impact that this loss of learning is having on our kids as we move forward, and the types of things that we need to do as a district and as a community to address that loss of learning and support our families and our teachers and our schools as we move forward in what we now consider the new normal.
Thank you so much, Deb, for unpacking some of the highlights from the report. I don't think we're surprised to learn that the pandemic has had the most adverse impact on historically disadvantaged students. our Black, Latino, and economically disadvantaged students, our English language learners, and as you mentioned, students with special needs. And these are all of the subgroups that we know were experiencing inequities prior to the pandemic.
And I think that, and I think it's, I mean, if we think about it, I mean, it's not just, I mean, it sounds really, I don't know, I think the data point, like if you want to hear one data point, I mean, numbers sometimes are a little bit, to make it hit a little harder home. Mm-hmm. In one district, we went from 20% of our fifth graders scored at grade level in math in 2019. But after the pandemic, it dropped to only 11%. And so we went from 1 in 5 to just about 1 in 10. So that's a lot of loss of learning. In another district, 27% of sixth graders scored at grade level in math. But by the time they were eighth graders, that dropped 6%. And this is the same students in the same district. So I mean, I think that really says a lot about the impact of our ability to engage kids. And then what are we going to do to get that learning back as we return to the classroom?
Yeah, and because of the implication of these gaps on the economy, on family, individual, and community sustainability, I mean, I'm just particularly concerned about the widening gaps that you mentioned in literacy and reading, because we know that literacy is the linchpin to all growth and development. And just to reiterate, you know, you said until third grade, you know, students are learning to read, and after third grade, they are reading to learn. So it is imperative that, you know, we figure out how to close these gaps. So as you also mentioned, you know, we don't know the long-term effects of the impact of the pandemic on students, families, and community, but, you know, it will be extremely critical for all of the relevant stakeholders, including business and industry, you know, to take this seriously and to take action today to address these issues. So this is everyone's issue.
And we know we don't get those years back.
Yes.
So we've got to make up for that lost time somehow.
Issue and to be accountable to changing these outcomes. So again, Deb, thank you for unpacking the report for us. Dr. Mills, I'm coming to you next. I want to talk about the school staffing shortages that have also dominated the headlines lately, both in the state and nationally. And I read some national stats that said that the ratio of hires to job openings in the education sector had reached new lows as the 2021-2022 school year got started, and that the pandemic was a key factor in 1/3 to 1/2 of teachers departing the profession. As president of the Louisiana Association of Educators, are school staffing shortages a problem that you're hearing from teachers and support staff across the state? And if so, what are your recommendations to remedy this issue?
Thank you again for that question. Absolutely, school staffing shortages are a trend we've unfortunately been seeing across the state, and not just our teachers, but our education support professionals, such as our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers, our paraprofessionals, clerks, et cetera, but our students. These are quality, consistent instruction, regardless of the challenges. My recommendations to educator shortage crisis include, we must tackle the problem head on, since this is impacting every job category in schools and in our state, throughout our state, excuse me. Collaboration. It starts with collaboration between state legislators and local school districts and the communities being served. With the legislative session that started on Monday, we are partnering with lawmakers and advocating for the bills that will improve conditions and help us recruit and retain our educators. And so we actually started a lot of those candid conversations prior to the legislative session starting. I really and truly appreciate the teacher recruitment, recovery, and retention task force that was implemented by State Representative Buddy Mincy. And so we had individuals who spoke on and actually had a lot of collaboration around what those issues were and what we needed to do in order to get teachers to remain in the profession, educators to remain in the profession, educators to come into the profession. And even having conversations with the Louisiana Department of Education. From my understanding, there are close to 30 recommendations that they will have and they will bring them forth in order to again keep our educators in the profession and to entice individuals to want to come into the profession. Moving on from that, improved working conditions. We must address the mental health of educators and cannot ignore issues such as teacher burnout, paid health benefits, and paid family leave for all staff, emergency sick leave for COVID-related absences, comprehensive safety and health protocols that are being enforced and implemented in schools, modernize the buildings and repair broken infrastructure, remove blocks/hindrances without lowering standards, quality professional development opportunities, paid apprenticeship programs, and full funding for teacher residency programs and grow your own programs, increased financial support for education, such as federal emergency funds should be used to alleviate the educator shortage. That's actually a conversation that I had with our state secretary, our U.S. Secretary of Ed, Secretary Cardona. We did, the LAE did a survey on last year, and it talked about the number of educators who wanted to leave the profession and educators that were seeking to go to another state for higher salaries, not to mention, I'm trying to think of what else was in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Of course, the number of jobs that our educators have, in addition to the full-time employment that they have with the systems, with the districts across our state. And a large percentage of them had more than one job. Some of them had 3 jobs. I mean, in various capacities, and it should not be. It should not be a situation where individuals have to supplement their income by working multiple jobs. It takes away, to me, and many others feel as if it takes away from the effectiveness that the educators can do in order to perform their jobs adequately in the classrooms, on the school bus routes, in the cafeterias. It's a huge strain, a lot of stress, and a lot of trauma focused around all of that. I think I mentioned increased financial support. Yes, that money can be used to increase the base pay and create a quality workforce, and it will also improve economic development for the state. Of course, having competitive pay and benefits, and educators simply aren't being paid enough to survive. We are fighting to get educator pay in Louisiana for educators in alignment with the Southern regional average. There needs to be a base pay for all educational support professionals and teachers that ensure a living wage. That is something that we have been fighting and advocating for on a year-to-year basis. And while we appreciate some of the pay boosts that we've received over the years, it's a moving target. And it's never enough. So we'll go from X amount of dollars, and then guess what? The states around us, they're increasing their salaries as well. They want to remain competitive so that the educators can remain in their state, but it's a nationwide issue. And Louisiana, I think that we get it now, and we have to make that commitment, but we have to keep pressing forward to ensure that our best and brightest students across the state, which is all of our students, every single one of them, is important to the functional alignment of our society and the enhancement of our future. And in order to do that, we have to have educators to help shape and mold those wonderful minds. We have to have that. Without that, I am truly concerned about what the future holds. But again, it starts with those recommendations, in addition to providing incentives for those individuals who are seeking to even go into the profession, because we have to have competitive wages ultimately, and we have to provide some type of incentives for individuals to want to go into the profession, because they do have choices. They have the ability to pivot and go into other professions. I mean, they're excellent teachers, are excellent trainers. They can do professional development. It's a number of different things that that our educators can do.
Thank you, Dr. Mills, for that overview. You know, I get very concerned about the fractures in the school personnel pipeline that can really leave our schools and children more vulnerable. We continue to hear that teachers, and as you mentioned, are exhausted and demoralized, both locally and nationally. And again, many of those conditions that created these feelings among educators existed prior to the pandemic. So as you indicated, there continues to be much more that needs to be done to fairly support our teachers and educators in order to keep them whole and our schools strong. And I commend you for your leadership at the LAE. Thank you
so much,
Dr. Mills, for your insight.
Absolutely. And again, it's not just pay, it's so much more than that we need to do to continue to assist with the development of the whole educator. Just as we assist with the whole child, we have to support one another, uplift one another, because we do need that support. I see more often than not educators who are retiring, educators who are going into another profession. I have a lot of close friends that have gone on to other states and have gone on to other professions. And so there is a increase in retirements in the data through the teachers retirement system of Louisiana, because I also serve on the board of trustees for that group as well. And it has been really enlightening to learn about the trends pre-COVID and even through this unfortunate pandemic. So again, I've learned a lot. It's taken a lot for us to work together collaboratively as a unit, and we have to continue to forge forward. Educators are working harder now than they ever have because of so many different changes that have been made to the profession. So I just wanted to add that also.
Thank you. I think that's a great segue to you, Ms. Cooper. As a school board member and former school board president, you've been in very close proximity to all of the pandemic conversations, strategies, and ideation to help schools navigate the pandemic. Now, 2 years into the pandemic, what are some actions you think school boards across our state got right, and where do you believe the work still remains?
Thank you. I want to thank the panelists for that great information they provided us with. And just thinking about the 2 years into the pandemic, some of the actions that I feel that school boards across our state have gotten right is this. You know, we were faced with an onslaught of challenges, and there was just so much uncertainty there, you know, when we were hit with COVID. And we know that this was one of our main objectives. We had to ensure student safety. And at the same time, you know, ongoing with learning to take place. And so we were resigned to do that. Safety of not only our students, but on all of our employees in our school community. That meant our administration, our teachers, and other staff members. And so with that in mind, we put in the strategies that we thought would be most effective. And when I say we, is led by the board, working with our administration for our school district, and all of the stakeholders, because we made a point of involving all of the stakeholders in soliciting their input. This was going to be a team decision. Whatever the final decision would be that would be made, a team decision, getting buy-in from all of our stakeholders. And so we thought we got this right, following the advice of the experts, you know, the scientists and the health field experts, and all of our stakeholders, input from our parents and teachers and administration and even students. So
You're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you, Dr. Mills. You're muted.
with all of our stakeholders in a timely manner, and even conduct polls to get their input. So yeah, we felt good about getting started right with following our leaders, from our governor all the way down to the guidelines from the CDC, guidelines from our Louisiana Department of Health, and our local city of Monroe officials as well. And so that got us started right, and it worked. It worked. And so what we wanted to make sure too was that we would safeguard our school community, even, you know, from the outside community, because see, we interact with them, they will come to our school community, and we had the mitigation strategies in place. And I'm talking about how we had all of the masking, all the hand wipes, and all of the sanitation measures, all of that in place to make sure we kept our school community safe. So we are just thankful that we had the assistance of our state leaders and the federal funds that were given to us. All of that made the difference. We had all that we needed to be effective in protecting and keeping our kids, our children, and our employees safe. And so I just want to add a few additional things here. You know, Debra, the first panelist, talked about the learning gap, and that is real, and it's a significant learning gap that we're going to have to address. And so our students are going to need extra support as we go forward. And I say that because a lot of these kids, this learning gap is definitely real, and especially in kids that are in the poorer households. They will need our attention even more. And some of these kids were in, say, bad environments, and a lot more, let's say, domestic abuse was noted in a lot of the reports that I've read. And so these kids have been in some environments, and that's taken them away from a lot of that we may have instilled in them. Because look, in a school environment, kids are taught how to you know, work with each other, and wait their turn and classroom order. And the virtual learning took them out of that environment. Now, some of them continue to get it in their home environments. That's good. But, you know, we're going to have to, you know, just realize that some of our kids will need a lot more of our support than others. And I think this too, parents now, I think they are, they see what teachers have to go through every day. Then at 8 to 3 and beyond time hour that they have our children. They have a greater respect for the teachers now, I believe. And these teachers are our unsung heroes. And I'm saluting them. They provide so much for our students. It's more than just teaching them the ABCs. These teachers, they give them a lot of support and personal care, you know, making them feel loved. And that goes a long way in helping them as they go forward in life. So we are going to have to continue to support our teachers in a greater way and showing our appreciation for this great work that teachers do. And that's why I heard Dr. Mills talking about the teacher shortage and not adequate pay and all of that. We must change that. We must change that because, you know, the essential workers we talk about, those teachers are one of those essential workers and really more. That's a great profession and they should be financially rewarded as well. And so I also noted this as I was thinking about our school system, our school district as a whole. Things that we got right, we had an administration that had a system in place that we could communicate effectively to all of the stakeholders and get feedback from them. And that was important. When we had to move to both face-to-face and virtual learning, and teachers had to teach virtually, we had the systems to put in place for that to take place. And we didn't lose a lot of time for getting that set up. Even our students had access to Chromebooks that they could check out and take home if needed. A lot of the kids had devices at home, but a lot of them did not. But they could still check out devices, and so that's something we did right, having that technology in place. Now we know this: technology will not replace teachers. That's one thing we've learned, and so we, in addition to the technology, we need qualified, certified teachers in every classroom. And I want to make this point. We need certified teachers in every classroom, but we need those certified teachers teaching the subject that they're certified in. And so that, along with continued professional development for all of our employees, even the principals, because that we have new learning methods and that will need to be put in place. Not only should the teacher know about that, but that administrator of the school and other supervisors that supervise the teachers, they all should be trained in the best practices and the innovations we have in education. So professional development for all of our employees will be so important.
Those are all great points, Ms. Cooper.
Yes.
And we really appreciate that perspective. And when I think about the pandemic and the enormity of what schools were up against and how they had to quickly shift to serve students in the midst of uncertainty. I just want to say that our school districts across the state really should be commended for all the things that you pointed out that they did get right. That's not letting anybody off the hook. It's just, commending them for their action during a very difficult time. So we should all vigorously support our schools and get behind our school districts, because they're certainly going to need to be fortified for the work that we know remains. And I want to thank you, Dr. Cooper, for all that you're doing to make schools better for students in Monroe. So moving on to from the virtual classroom and the current news of staffing shortages. Dr. Alexander, you've been working very closely with schools, teachers, principals, and the district throughout the pandemic. And I know that all of your work that you've been engaged in has been grounded in equity. As we continue to think about equity in education in the midst of COVID-19 recovery, if we had to zero in and get specific, what is the biggest resource gap and how do we close it?
Again, thank you all for having me. Great question. I definitely want to get into the gaps, but I also want to talk a little bit, I think, about the virtual classroom, because I think some folks think that, oh, we're done with virtual. We're done with virtual learning. And when we talk about really shifting mindsets around that, I think we have to all come to an agreement that there is probably still a space for virtual learning, especially because we're still feeling the impacts of COVID. So there are times when schools have to close classrooms due to COVID, and virtual learning still makes sense for some schools when they're experiencing that. I think moving forward, as our teachers become more accustomed to teaching both in person and virtually, because we don't know when we're going to face another emergency situation. We're praying that we never have to face, another pandemic. But even when we had to leave or evacuate for Hurricane Ida, there were schools that had to go virtual, right? They had to implement their virtual learning protocols. And so I think nationally, we may see more, maybe high schools use the virtual approach, which will allow for more flexibility on high school campuses. We have some kids now that are working because of the impacts of the pandemic, working part-time jobs more, full-time jobs more. So again, we have to come to a consensus on how do we train up our teaching staff and our leaders, for that matter, as it relates to navigating the long-term effects of this pandemic. And that may be hybrid learning. That may be mostly in person, but also some virtual learning as well. As K-12 educators, we are able to master online and virtual spaces if we continue to really lean into what that training looks like. In terms of the biggest gaps, right, which is the biggest part of your question, I think it is definitely training. I think ongoing support for teachers and leaders. And I believe, just like every other sector, we are struggling because we, again, to Dr. Mills's point, we have some recruitment challenges and we have some retention challenges and gaps. And so we're still facing a teacher shortage, but we are also facing a support staff shortage as well. For example, I was attending a meeting with some experts around curriculum and instruction, and they were having a hard time getting teachers to attend some of their professional development sessions because the districts that they're working with, they don't have enough substitute teachers. And so that is impacting the way that teachers are receiving their job embedded professional learning. If we don't have enough substitute teachers, our classroom teachers are not able to take off when they're sick. They're not able to take an emergency day. They're not able to take R&R. They can't even miss a day. Like I said, you know, if they want to attend some type of job embedded staff development training. Our human resource shortage is something that we have to fix. It is something that we have to fix in terms of making certain that we have enough trained professionals in our schools that can assist and support our students.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander, for walking us through those resource gaps. Training, I definitely think we can all agree that having trained teachers and high-level teachers for the appropriate courses in our classrooms will go a long way toward helping us to get to the outcomes that we're looking to achieve.
And if I could add, you know, another resource gap that we saw at the height of COVID, definitely technology access is also a gap and should be a part of our school level infrastructure. It is not just about virtual learning due to COVID, but it's about equipping our kids for their future careers. It is about providing them with access to information. It is about allowing them to explore at a higher level. And it's also about allowing us to create, to be creative rather, by offering blended learning solutions in the classroom. I think that that's super important because when we think of technology, now that we've gone through this pandemic, a lot of times we're just thinking about, you know, virtual learning. But there was blended learning, those aspects of learning, even pre-COVID. We really needed to zero in on providing our students with access to more technology. And I do definitely see a gap in that respect. So in terms of basic resources for our kids, access to technology is at the top for me. We saw this in basically every school district in the country. Every student, when we looked at one-to-one computer resource, it just was not in place for our kids. And we had to hustle to really get those resources, those federal resources in line, and have that funnel to state and districts so that we could get those laptop computers in place. At this point, and I'll close here, at this point, I really believe that a laptop computer should be a consumable. It should be like when we were in school and we had our textbook and our notebook, those were resources that were at the ready. I think that that should be definitely treated in the same sense. I think Wi-Fi should be accessible to every child, every school-age child. And I think those resources, if we make them tangible for our kids, I think that we will see more growth in terms of student academic growth. I definitely see this as, along with our staffing gaps, I definitely see technology as something that we're going to have to solve for.
Thank you for that, Dr. Alexander. And I too agree with you that technology is going to really be critical, not just as a tool for students to access learning in the classroom, but just the whole unpacking of technology careers in terms of where our society is continuing to go in terms of technology. And we definitely do not want our students to be left behind in terms of being able to access all of the varying career professions that are in the pipeline and that will continue to evolve around technology. So again, I agree that technology is something that we have to really put a focus on and double down on. So to keep us on track with our time, I want to move into our last round of questions. And Dr. Alexander, I want to come right back to you. What is the most critical focus that we need to be focusing in on at the moment? If we were to all get behind 1 to 2 system level of policy changes to increase equity in education post-COVID, what would it be and why?
I think in terms of policy, we definitely can lean in more because we are having attendance challenges, and I'm talking about really getting into the weeds and understanding what's happening at the school level. So I think, districts thinking through, if they haven't already, virtual attendance policies, seat time policies, summer school offerings, and really understanding what those policies look like. And that's really getting into the weeds, like I said, on the ground, really figuring out what needs to happen so that we can have our kids return to school. All of our children have not returned to school with this pandemic. And so I want to be clear about really honing in on those kinds of policies, and not policies where they're punitive, but policies that really allow districts to support families as our kids, more and more of our kids begin to return to school. I also think when we talk about continuing to look at policy, and I don't know specifically what parts of the policy yet. I think we all as a community need to look at our accountability testing. So for Louisiana, that's our LEAP test. What does that end of year, what do those policies, how are they impacting our kids and our educators on a daily, right? How do we look at making certain that our policies in regard to accountability, again, are supportive, especially during this time? Now, I think once we get past this time that we're in due to the pandemic's impact, we can kind of go back to stronger policy with regard to accountability testing. But I think at this point, I think if our state officials, if our local districts, if the folks that are at the school level can really begin to talk about how these accountability testing policies can support our students and our educators more, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay. Ms. Betty Ward Cooper, same question for you. What do we need to be focusing on, and what are the policy issues, 1 or 2, or system level changes that we really need to be focusing in at this time, and why?
Another thing I can add is this, the illiteracy rate in the state of Louisiana amongst our public school students. It's an alarming rate. Only 24% of the public education students that enter the 4th grade are proficient readers. Only 24% that enter 4th grade are proficient readers. And illiteracy affects everything in a negative way. For that individual, for the family, for our community as a whole, our economy. And so we need to focus on turning this around. All the stakeholders need to be aware of this, and they need to come to the table and say what they can do to help us turn this around. Because we in the school districts, we're going to be working hard and smart to change these statistics, but we need everybody involved. Parents, our business community, our educational community, all that it affects.
Okay.
We, in the school district, we've certainly hired literacy coaches, and that will go a long way. Every teacher needs to, teachers reading. reading across the curriculum. You've heard that. Reading across the curriculum, writing across the curriculum. It's a new kind of focus. And so, yeah, reading, having literate citizens. And that'll be a foundation that we all can build on.
Awesome. Dr. Mills, same question. What do we need to be focusing on in this moment? Can you tell us about any policy changes that we should be getting behind, or any system level work that we need to be supporting to increase equity in education post-COVID?
Thank you. Absolutely. I think that because we've gone through a lot of changes during COVID and that we've had to pivot to perform differently, I think this is a great opportunity for us to, back to what Dr. Alexander mentioned, to not only reassess accountability for students and what that looks like, but also accountability for educators and what that looks like as well. The value-added model has been in place for quite some time. And even during the time that I was in the classroom, there are some gaps there to make the accountability system in that regard subjective. And I really think that we need to reassess that and what that looks like. Now that we've had the opportunity to utilize the value-added model for, if it hasn't been 10 years, it's almost been 10 years. And I think many of the practitioners in this profession have realized that, you know what, there's something here that we need to possibly review this and take a look at something else. Not just for our educators again, but for our students as well. I remember last year during the time that, and I still serve on the Accountability Commission, there was a huge push for student accountability, and I'm all for that. However, our students have gone through a huge ordeal where they've had to pivot as well, and they've gone through a lot of trauma and a lot of unfortunate circumstances. They've lost relatives, they've lost friends. And so we cannot be insensitive to that. We can't be insensitive to that at all. Emotional situations that our students and our educators have gone through have made an impact on their performance and their ability to be their best selves through this situation. And so again, while I do believe in accountability, we should not be so hung up on accountability to the point where we lose the humanity in education and what that should be like.
Thank you.
That, along with, again, I have to go back to properly compensating our educators in the profession. Those would be the two primary things that I would look at.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And real quickly, Deb Vaughan, same question. Any policy changes that you see, or
Sure,
system
real
level
quick.
changes?
I think at the school level, implement a well-designed diagnostic assessments and then help and use the data so that teachers can help students to catch up. And then at the district level, to acknowledge the impact of poverty and racial and economic segregation in school districts, conduct an equity assessment and report card in the district that identifies where poverty and associated stressors impact children and their ability to learn, and then leverage resources around that. And the report card, the equity report card, would then allow community to get around that. It would disaggregate the data so that the community could see where those inequities lie, and then focus resources on addressing those at the district and community level.
Thank you, Deb. And I know that we're going to be working, the Urban League with the district to look at equity scorecards around the state. So I look forward to engaging and assisting in that work. So I want to thank everybody. We've come to the end of our time. This has been a rich conversation. I truly enjoyed hearing from all of you. And for our attendees, I hope this has been an impactful 60 minutes for you as well. As we get ready to transition to the next panel, I certainly hope that you all will stick around for the remainder of the conference today and also join us again on tomorrow. So with that, I'll say, enjoy your day.